Welcome to Create the Best Me. I am Carmen Hecox, a personal development coach, and I am so excited to be connecting with you today. Whether you're listening to the podcast or joining us on YouTube, my goal is to help women navigate through midlife challenges with compassion, inspiration, and empowering conversation. Each week, we'll dive into thought-provoking topics designed to build self-confidence, overcome invisible woman syndrome, and find the courage to create the best version of yourself. I'll also be joined by expert guests who will share the wisdom and insights. So make yourself comfortable and let's embark on this journey together. Are you ready to learn how to take control of your emotions and boost your self-confidence? Well, you're in luck because today we've got the expert on the line. Today's guest is Shane Adamson, the director of Center for Marriage and Family Counseling. With over 25 years in experience in the field, Shane is a pro at helping couples and individuals navigate the complexity of addiction, trauma, sexuality, mental health, and other relationship issues. But wait, there's more. Shane received his undergraduate degree in family science from Brigham Young University and his master's in clinical social work from the University of Utah. So you know you're in good hands. And here's a little fun fact for you. Shane has the most fantastic smile, and if you're listening to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform, you should head on over to YouTube to get a glimpse of it. So sit back, relax, and get ready to learn how to take control of your emotions and boost your self-confidence with the help of Shane Adamson. Let's dig in. Well, hello, Shane, and welcome to Create the Best Me podcast. It is such an honor to have you on the show. Let me first start off by saying, I bet your patients have a hard time leaving you as a therapist because you are such a likable man. And you have an amazing smile that makes me want to smile back. I know my listeners will love your smile and find so much value in the topic we will be discussing today. But before that, please tell the audience a little bit about you, your business, and your amazing podcast.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad to be on your show. And Carmen and I met through a program called Power Up Podcasting. And so we've been on this journey together now for many months, and we encourage each other. And a little background about me, I've been a marriage and family counselor, and I have a license in social work. And I've been doing that for 26 years. And my story is small town country boy marries big city girl. And so I also am married, and we're coming up on 30 years of marriage. And I have 3 children, and 2 are in college, and 1 is a senior in high school. And gosh, my specialties have kind of followed my life wounds. This is a little embarrassing to admit, but I was a troubled teenager in high school. So my first job was working with troubled teens. And then my parents sadly went through a divorce, which was a hard thing. And so I started to study divorce and how can people rebound after divorce, and how can you keep family traditions alive after divorce? And so I work a lot with couples. And then mental health, depression, anxiety, and trauma. So that's just a little bit about me, Carmen.
What about your podcast? Because you do have a podcast.
Oh, thank you for reminding me. So there was a Harvard study that talked about at the end of life, loving relationships are what matters most. And even if someone had cancer, or it doesn't matter if they were a bricklayer or the president of the United States, if they have loving relationships, they're going to be happier. And so my podcast is how to develop loving relationships and identify those things that get in the way of loving relationships growing and developing.
Great. That sounds like an amazing podcast. Thank you so much for sharing that information. So I asked you to come on the show today because as a therapist, I think the topic we'll be discussing today, you've probably have helped women many times over on the topic. It's how women going through midlife may struggle with self-confidence.
I think that's such an important topic, Carmen. And I think that not only women, but men too have confidence challenges. And Actually, I just want to give a little disclaimer that even though I'm a man, I feel I've paid my dues and walked alongside many women who've gone through hard midlife challenges and battled with confidence issues. And so I'm really excited to explore this topic and try to learn some ways for people to be comfortable in their own skin. And if they have a low confidence, to get some of their confidence back.
Great. So, to start off, describe high self confidence.
Well, um, I have recently been studying this idea of inner peace. And so I think inner peace and confidence go together. And so I have it broken into three things. A quiet mind is really important. And so a lot of people, like 70% of Americans or people around the world, battle with anxiety at some time in their life. When you have anxiety, you have racing thoughts, you can't recall memory as easily, and you kind of a little bit lean towards fear and worry and some negativity. And so being able to quiet your mind is one part. The second is a calm heart. Most people can only identify three emotions in their body, like anger, fear, and sadness. But we have so many other emotions, and our emotions can guide us to self care. If we're stressed, we might need to slow down or just things like that. We'll get into that later in the show. And the last thing is self compassion, just liking yourself and being kind to yourself. If you make a mistake, don't beat yourself up. So I would say confidence is a quiet mind, a calm heart, and some inner peace about who you are.
Is high self confidence visible? And the reason I ask this because sometimes when I'm scrolling through social media or I'm out in the public settings, I notice people that appear like they have a genuine smile on their face, or they walk with almost as if there's light radiating from in them, so much energy.
I would say that there are some people that I'm drawn to with their YouTube videos that a light comes from them, and I just feel uplifted by their energy. And so I do feel like your discernment can sometimes find those people with confidence and light. And then there are some other people that I think are kind of big storytellers, and I really feel it. I really know for sure if someone's authentic is when I meet with them, if they share some of their struggles and are a little vulnerable and they share their successes. I have this red flag radar come up. If someone's over telling big stories, I'm thinking they might be insecure and they're trying to share all these big stories to get validation. So you can't always tell on social media if someone's truly confident, but your discernment, if you spend enough time with that person in person or listen to their messaging, you can tell with time if they're confident.
Great. Is there such thing as like medium or regular self confidence?
Hmm. I might frame it more as based on our kind of day to day life experiences. Our confidence might kind of just like a thermostat go up a little bit when we're really getting some positive feedback or being successful in some tasks. And then if we have some setbacks that are kind of, we're getting stressed out, like when I do accounting, my confidence goes down because I'm not a numbers guy and it gets confusing. And so, depending on the task I'm doing and my day to day events, that I believe your confidence can kind of go up and down.
So, describe what low confidence, someone who has low confidence, what would they be like?
I would say someone that struggles to maintain eye contact or someone that maybe won't really answer fully all your questions, just kind of say yes, no, and they're trying to exit the conversation. It's like they're afraid of being exposed. But someone that is confident is willing to share their story of their life, not to dominate a conversation, but when they're asked a question, they're vulnerable and courageous and just share their story of who they are. And those people are like more confident because they are secure in who they are. And when asked, they feel like they don't need to give a script. They can just say, "This is me."
Do you find that women who are approaching midlife or in midlife experience symptoms such as low confidence more than they did when they were younger? And if so, why and what triggers do you think could have caused it?
So I believe that in your 20s, there's a zest for life and you have this feeling of seize the day. And most likely you haven't had some serious setbacks in life. So you might be more willing to take risks, be more confident in yourself and your goals. But over the next 20 years, so I kind of look at midlife could be anywhere from 45, 55, depending on where you put the tag in the middle. But if someone has had a lot of hard life experiences and setbacks, that may take down some of that zest or confidence. And so people might be a little more guarded or less willing to take risks.
I read somewhere that the key to having healthy relationships or being able to pursue your own life goals comes from having high confidence. Is that correct?
I would think confidence is an important piece of the puzzle. I think that when you have certain skill sets and then you do those tasks and you do well at them, your confidence gradually increases, your self-esteem increases. And especially if you get some feedback from others saying, wow, that was like, after this podcast, if you get a number of people saying, I loved the podcast, you're so good at interviewing, your confidence is going to climb up because you're getting feedback and you're practicing and getting better. And so I think that confidence grows as you develop skills in an area and then you get, positive feedback.
What are some tools that we can use right now to regulate our self confidence?
Um, I would say I'm going to go a little deeper on that last idea of self-compassion. So, I explained earlier that there's some days when like I'm doing accounting or maybe I try to spend some time with my daughter and she's like, Dad, quit following me, you're bugging me. Like, so then I feel a little rejected by my daughter and accounting now is another negative on my day. And then maybe I get no-showed and I might start to think, wow, I wonder if these people feel I'm a good therapist. So if you get like 3 of those in a row, I have written something and it's called a self-compassion letter. And I need to give credit where I got this from. Kristen Neff has a website called selfcompassion.org. And the first thing I found on our website are some meditations that are guided from as short as 6 minutes up to 16 to 20 minutes. So based on your time. And these meditations were one's called loving kindness. One is called a self-compassion moment. So it's only a 6 minute. But what you'll hear on there is a soothing voice that'll say something like, this is a moment of suffering. Will you sit with yourself, maybe put your hand on your heart? And part of life is suffering. And can you hold yourself through this rough moment? And so I would listen to those meditations. And then sometimes I didn't have my phone on me, or it was just a place where couldn't do a meditation. So I've written a little letter to myself and I won't read the whole letter, but I'll just kind of give you the gist of it. But it starts out with, Shane, I can see you're feeling kind of hurt and anxious right now. Maybe there's some internal voices that are messing with your peace. I want you to remember that you can make it through this hard moment and live more in peace, and that this hard time will pass. And remember, this is the wise part of yourself, encouraging you to be gentle with yourself and be patient until this hard moment passes. And so I have some little affirmations that I wrote beneath that letter that I'll remind myself. And so that's some examples of some practical things to increase your self-compassion, whether it's a guided meditation or a letter to yourself, has helped me live a little more in confidence and hold myself through those difficult times when I'm more anxious and insecure.
Yeah. My first marriage failed due to betrayal. At the time, I felt powerless. I told myself I was a failure and I was unlovable. I believed all the mean words that were spoken to me during the divorce to be true. And so my resolution to that was, since I thought I was unlovable, I decided to begin to work on myself to become someone who could be lovable. And after spending several incredible years discovering who I am, loving myself, accepting myself, I learned to trust again. And I found love with my husband that I've been married to for 11 years this last July.
Wow. Carmen, that was so courageous of you to be vulnerable and let people know you had a struggle and you didn't feel lovable for a period of time in your life. And then you did some work to kind of shout down those negative messages. It sounds like you suffered some emotional abuse. I'm really sorry to hear that. But I'm really grateful for the courage that you had to move forward and heal from that. And now you've developed a new love story with a new man. And are you feeling more lovable?
Oh, yeah, totally. My husband reminds me every day when I have my low that I am lovable and I'm needed.
That's great. I would say that on a personal note, my mom and dad divorced, and my dad cheated on my mom. And so it was a betrayal story. And my mom stayed single for 10 years. And her number one character trait she was looking for in a man was someone with integrity, because she felt my dad had kind of been so two-sided. There was a part of him that was loving and nice, and there was a part of him that was deceptive. And so she didn't want that ever again in her life. And so, yeah, that was a story of my mom's recovery of kind of, I don't know if feeling unlovable, but kind of trusting and wanting to feel secure in who she was with, that person was real and authentic.
I know that we've talked about comparison. For example, when we go on vacation, I compare myself to other women. I think they look amazing. I wish I could look like them. And I start to develop guilt. I say, I should have worked out a little bit harder. I knew I was going on vacation. I should have stuck to my diet. But then my husband brings me right out of it because I feel love from him. I tell myself, stop comparing yourself. And I can get back on, try all over again. And I'm healthy. And I know I look fantastic.
Yeah. Carmen, you're vulnerable again, sharing how comparison has been a battle for yourself. I battle comparison. Like, I'll sometimes tune into the websites of other therapists, and if they have like more therapists or they have more programs or their website is nicer or looks better, then I start to feel less than. And I really love, there's a phrase that I read that was stay in your own lane. And the backstory to that is basically two Olympic swimmers are really side by side. And one swimmer kind of paused his stroke to look to see if he was ahead or behind his opponent. And the experts believe that that little pause cost him the race. And so the problem with comparison in my eyes is you'll always find someone that's above you, maybe more beautiful, more successful, and you'll also find people below you. And so there's a risk of pride of thinking you're better than others, or there's that feeling that you're not enough. And so stay in your lane and just, I guess at the end of the day, the most important validation is just saying, hey, whatever was done or left undone, I'm still lovable, I'm good. And maybe just have that be your guide. It's okay to just look, but if you dwell too much on comparing, there's a risk of just kind of going into a darker emotional place.
Exactly. Yeah. I know that you had talked about anatomy of low confidence. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So, as a counselor, you got to realize that I'm dealing with people that are battling with depression or anxiety, and that one of the symptoms of mental health is like low confidence with a lot of these mental health conditions. And so I've come to believe that life wounds related with other people, I call them attachment wounds or relationship wounds, are probably the biggest impact on our mental health and on our confidence. And so I've identified about six that are really common. Do you want me to explore those for your listener?
Sure.
Okay.
Please.
So I'm going to go to my notes here. So if someone experienced rejection, so I want you to think of all the different ways rejection could happen. It could happen with a family member being cold to you at a barbecue or a social, and you could be feeling like they don't like you, being excluded from a group. Suddenly someone says, oh, you're not welcome here. Or you may notice on social media, a party in the neighborhood and you are not included, but you know most of the people. And so a little story inside of yourself is, are they rejecting me or did they forget me? And so I had a deeper rejection wound in my life where a business partner, he and I had went about 4 or 5 years in business and it was going quite well, decided he didn't want to be in business with me anymore. And there wasn't anything ethical or problematic. It was just personality challenges between the two of us. And so for each of us to grow in the ways we needed to, we parted ways. But it was a triple loss because I was really friends with all the peers in that office and he owned the office. I had to buy him out of the business, which was a financial loss. And then there was kind of the starting over. And so I'll be honest, my confidence was in a lower place until I could unpack that wound of rejection. So that's one. So rejection, and I already talked a little bit about loss when I mentioned rejection, but think of losing a job or a friend moving, or many clients after divorce kind of lose their confidence in love. Think of betrayal. So of the 15 couples I'm counseling right now, I'd say half of them are dealing with infidelity or cheating or discovery of some inappropriate relationship outside of the marriage. And so the betrayed spouse is disoriented and angry and sad and fearful about the future. So betrayal can come in the form of like, that's a biggie right there, or more simple things like breaking a promise or someone being deceitful, a coworker taking credit for something that you did. So that's some examples of betrayal. There's just three more. So let's hang in here. Neglect. Think of you come home from a hard day's work and you're excited to tell your partner. And while you're telling your story of your day, your partner's on the phone, maybe checking email, and you don't feel heard. You feel a little neglected. Or going into a party and it seems like you're not included in conversations and you feel invisible. And then there's just two more: abandonment. If someone that you're really close to and you feel like you have a great connection just suddenly stops talking to you and you like send a text or some other messages and they don't respond, that's a feeling of abandonment. Or I kind of think of, like, I had one client who a big theme of her life was her dad left before she was even born. So her abandonment happened even pre-birth. And she always wondered in her mind, what would have my life been like if I had a dad who encouraged me and was at the important milestones or crossroads of my life? And so that would be what we call complicated grief, because it's really easy for people to say, oh, well, you didn't have that, so just smile and be happy. But it hurt. She couldn't. She was like, I think my life would have been different if I had a dad who was loving on me and I didn't have that. And that's a loss and an abandonment. And the last one, most of us know someone or we ourselves have experienced some emotional, physical, or sexual harm that someone caused. And so those are very complicated wounds. So I guess the anatomy of low confidence would be having many of these relationship wounds that I just named pile on top of each other. And then we start to feel less confident and less than, and just maybe a little more guarded and not willing to kind of just put ourselves out there. Is that helpful?
That's very helpful. But let's say, for example, you or me or, one of the listeners have experienced several of those areas that you just identified. There
Okay.
is a way out, isn't there? But what kind of steps can they take to get out?
One of the favorite sayings in therapy is, it's not the wounds of our life that harm us, but the stories we tell ourselves. And so let's just kind of take the example of betrayal. So a woman could have some of these negative beliefs. If I was more attractive or more sexual with my partner, or maybe a more pleasant personality, he wouldn't have cheated. But the research tells us that, at least on the men who cheat, a significant majority, they have a sexually active sex life, and the husband's just selfish and just kind of being immature, basically. Now, there might be some, what do you call those? Like those few obscure places where maybe a man feels sexually starved. But even in those cases, a more mature thing to do is say, let's go to therapy to get our intimacy back. So a woman who has these negative core beliefs that they're not enough in some way need to challenge those beliefs and say, I am enough. And this was my husband's choice. And this was selfish on his part. And I'm not going to believe that I was not enough anymore. And so it comes to challenging the negative beliefs. That's probably the first part. And then I've kind of developed some other tools and resources for your audience, just based on some stories of clients of mine that have gone through hard things that kind of help them through that. Do you want to hear more about those things?
Please, yes.
Okay. So the one story is this woman who had lost, I think, a 20 or 21-year-old daughter to a tragic accident. And she just went into this deep despair. And so it was more complicated than just low confidence. It was like not functioning, isolating. And she was in her house and not really engaging with people that were trying to engage her. And someone told her that if she wanted to get rid of the feeling of hopelessness and despair, she had to have deeper connections in her life. So she focused on connecting first with her family. And then she gradually got the courage to connect to her community, like volunteering, whether that be at a school or a church, and then connecting to her higher power. And, there are some people that are religious that might get that from a church, and other people might get that from kind of like going into nature and mindfulness. But she connected to her higher power and then her true self. And as she started to put herself out there, connection suddenly brought light into her life, and that despair started to fade. So I would say connecting to yourself, connecting to your higher power, your community and your family and friends would be one really important resource.
Perfect. Yeah. I noticed that you earlier on in the podcast, you talked about the thermometer metaphor. You talked about
Oh,
high,
yeah.
medium, and cold. Can we talk a little bit more about
So a colleague and a friend, Mark Berg, came up with this idea of if you were to visualize a kind of one of those old style thermometers, not the ones that just say 72 degrees, it's red and it's got the mercury in it. And so most of us like our home temperature to be 72 to 74 degrees. So let's just say the emotions of 72 to 74 degrees is peace, joy, contentment, happiness. And that's where we want to live our lives most of the time, right? But in life, because there is pain and suffering and stress, sometimes we get flooded. And so jealousy could flood us, anger could flood us, bitterness or resentment could flood us. And think of a car that gets overheated. What do we, what would you do if your car was overheated, Carmen?
you'd have to pull over. Otherwise, you're in for a new car or major repair bills.
Yeah, you'll melt the engine if you keep driving a car that's overheating. And humans sometimes, even when they're overheated, just keep driving. But you hit the nail on the head that like when we're flooded, we need to like kind of take a time out. You're not going to have as much wisdom or clarity about yourself or your life. And if you even try to communicate with your spouse, sometimes you can't even listen to them or get your words out in a helpful way. It might be more critical or negative or venting. And so the first tool is like taking time out. And then the other warning that I would say is I put these emotions into the freezing zone. So this would be really cold temperatures like 32 and below. And it could be overwhelm, it could be stress. And instead of being flooded and hot, we choose to escape and numb. And so we all have our favorite ways of escaping and numbing. Some people have a Netflix marathon. Some people maybe overspend on Amazon, and someone else might overeat. Someone might drink. I have some guys who go into porn as escapism. So basically, we have unhealthy ways to escape and not feel, but part of life is sitting through hard emotions and finding more healthy coping. So the thermometer is just a tool that I love for emotional regulation to try to not numb and escape, take timeouts when we're flooded so that we can live more in room temperature. Is that helpful?
That's very helpful. I know that when we talked before, you talked about that lady who had lost her child. You talked about community. So is that kind of the same as like an accountability group or something?
Yeah. Actually, just before I get to the accountability group idea, I want to bring up one other emotion, and it's the emotion of shame. And I just want to explain to your listeners the difference between guilt and shame. So guilt is actually more of a healthy emotion because guilt prompts us to make amends or say sorry. We feel this pang in our heart that we did something wrong and we want to make it right. But shame, what we've studied about shame is that it's toxic. And when we feel shame, this is a quote by Brene Brown, who is just a famous researcher on shame. She said, the reason most people who walk the earth are very medicated and addicted and overweight is because of toxic shame. When we feel crummy about ourselves, we go to a banana nut muffin and a beer, or if that's not your beverage of choice, wine and cheese or something to just kind of soothe. And I believe that shame leads a lot of people to shrink in their confidence, and there's usually some negative messages. Another favorite idea about shame is, do you remember the show Gremlins? I don't know if you ever
I
watched
remember.
those little critters that are in the kitchen causing havoc with the microwave. Well, they tried to pour water on the gremlins and gremlins grew that made them multiply. And so I do believe shame could be compared to this little negative self-talk gremlin within us. If we don't talk about it and deal with it, it grows and gets bigger. And the bigger shame gets, the more we shrink in our confidence and the more we're going to kind of numb and escape and self-soothe in not the most healthy way. So I just wanted to put that little plug in, and you could get any of Brene Brown's books to understand shame. And but I'm ready to cross over then into kind of discussing the importance of accountability groups. So let me see here. I'm going to share a story about my wife because it's a good story about confidence. So my wife has been a stay-home homemaker. I didn't impose that on her. She did work in a salon because she has a cosmetology degree. But then once the kids came, she wanted to be home with the kids. And now we have an 18-year-old. She's finally saying, hey, I'm ready to go back into the career. And she's choosing portrait photography. But because of some of her attachment wounds, she's had some real angry people kind of yell at her, and that traumatized her. She had some childhood experiences with her parents with anger, and so she just doesn't like angry people. And so she has this little fear that someone won't like the pictures, will yell at her. And so she formed an accountability group. And I would say it's much more comprehensive than just overcoming anger. There was some fears of like launching her website, and there were fears around business, and she would get overwhelmed with appointments or accounting. And so in this accountability group, they talk about posing. They do role plays about your first consultation and how you would talk to people. And she would actually practice with members in her group, and they would say, hey, you did great, but you were on a script and you need to let me talk a little bit. Because she was like so scripted, and because she's anxious, and the more she's on script and the less anxious she is. But anyhow, so in this accountability group, she confided in me. She says, guess what? I love my accountability group so much. I'm still scared as heck to launch, but I can't let them down. And they're starting to launch, and I'm feeling left behind. And I don't want to be left behind because they've helped me and I've helped them. And I don't want them to think that their help didn't work. But I would say when I went through this retreat at Finding Peace, I set some personal goals for my physical health, mental, emotional. But I typically, if you think of New Year's resolutions, the number one reason that they are kind of off and done by late January or mid-February latest is we don't have accountability groups and we don't have people to encourage us. So left to our own devices, we'll make excuses or say this was an unrealistic goal. And but accountability groups have a way of carrying you to when you're struggling with motivation or confidence. So I really believe in accountability groups being really powerful.
I think that's a really great suggestion. And I know that we all have people in our lives that we love and in some case consider them our own personal support group. But I wanted to ask you, what's the difference between an accountability partner group and people that may be enabling you?
Oh, um, well, accountability partner is just like one person. It could be a family member, it could be your spouse, it could be a friend that you feel like they have the personality to call out your BS. And so you just ask, will you be my accountability partner for this goal? I'm going to try to lose weight. I'm going to save money, whatever the goal is. A group, you just get the synergy of multiple personalities, and each one has a different strength. And there'll probably be one or two people in the group that annoy you, but that's good practice to deal with annoying people. And maybe you're the annoying one to someone else and they have to deal with you. But enabling, I kind of look at enabling as someone who's kind of afraid. And so they put on this little victim, fearful persona so that a rescuer will come in and help them. But they know inside that they're not growing. But it just feels good to have someone rescue them and help them through it. But if they're really honest with themselves, they know that they need to stop doing the little messaging out to the rescuers in their life to just let me do this on my own. But if you really are insecure, you're probably going to just keep being a victim as long as rescuers will show up. Does that make sense?
Exactly. Yeah, that makes sense. Because I always think when you're forming a support group or something, maybe you might not want to form that support group with your mom because she might say, oh, here, she might play the mama bear and rescue you.
Oh yeah, interesting. Yeah, you want to be careful in who you choose in your groups. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. Oh, we have touched on so many topics here. Shane, thank you so much for coming on to the show. Please let our listeners know the name of your podcast and when each episode is released.
So if you look on any of the major platforms, so Google Podcasts, Apple, and many of the smaller name podcast hosts, and search for Help for Loving Relationships, 2 episodes a month are released and they're on Tuesdays. And so we've covered a variety of topics this last year. I just counted we're around 22 episodes, and I just need to record 2 more to complete my content calendar for this year. And so I'm excited to have the first year under my belt coming up in the next few months.
Perfect. Where can people learn more about you? And do you have a website or a Facebook page that people can follow you?
People can search Center for Marriage and Family Counseling, and the short acronym for that is CMFC, CMFC Dallas. And in your show notes, I'll provide my bio and contact info and my handles for my social media. But thanks for thinking of me. And right during this post pandemic, a lot of mental health and relationship problems are alive and well. And so most therapists are pretty swamped.
Exactly. I will include all this amazing information in the show notes along with your information. Thanks again for coming out on the show. This has been so much fun. I believe that this show will be probably my most listened to show, and I will have to have you back on.
You're so kind. Thank you, Carmen. It's been a delight to be with you.
Likewise. Wow, that was an incredibly informative and valuable conversation with Shane. I know I took a lot away from it, especially when it comes to understanding how challenging negative beliefs can help you build your self confidence. So it's time to put that knowledge into action. I challenge you to connect with others and build a support system. Whether you live by yourself or with someone, it's important to have a group of people who can understand and support you in your journey to building your self confidence. Schedule a weekly or bi-weekly non-negotiable standing meeting to connect and discuss your progress. And be sure to download Shane's tools for understanding and managing emotions. And check out all the resources available at createthebestme.com/EP003. If you're in the Dallas area, don't hesitate to contact Shane directly and schedule an appointment. And don't forget to share this episode with your friends and family who might benefit from the information shared. And if you want to be the first to know when a new episode is released, head on over to createthebestme.com and sign up to receive those notifications. Tune in next time for a 3-step process to gaining clarity and empower your life's purpose. Until next time, take care. Have a fantastic day.